chronic stress. You ever heard of it? You ever felt that way? You ever felt like burnout? Let's talk today about burnout and why it happens. And in order to start this, I actually want to talk about in your brain, what's going on, why do we feel burnout, and how can we start thinking about burnout in a way that actually is going to help move us past it and recover from it, okay? So in order to do that, by the way, my name is Zach Erickson, registered psychologist here in Edmonton, Alberta with Recharge Psychology. I today want to talk to you about, first off, what is burnout? But in order to do that, we need to actually first think about what is going on in your brain and how stress works in your brain. So I'm going to teach you a little bit of a lesson here. Don't worry, there's not going to be a test, but I think even if you pick up part of this, this will help you start to think about why do we start to feel burned out? First off, what is burnout, right? Burnout is a response that we have to stress, and particularly with chronic stress, right? And so we're actually going to jump in to something. I'm going to have to edit this in. But we're gonna first dive into what is burnout. Now we're gonna talk about like a very particular kind of burnout known as, and we're gonna jump in here to a little thing known as the ICD-11. Now the ICD-11 is actually, you know what? I realize ICD-11 is published by the World Health Organization. It's all like mental disorders and things like that. I believe it's just mental disorders. It's from mostly used in Europe. We use what's called the DSM-5 here in North America. In North America, we actually don't even, it's telling, but we don't recognize burnout as like a thing here, at least clinically, although there are other things that we might call it. However, let's dig in here. I'm going to swap this out here. Hopefully you can read this and it's not too pixelated, but I'm going to actually, I'm going to zoom in here so we can really, can I move that? Hey, look at that. Okay, here we go. Burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. Now, important thing to note here, by the way, let me fade back. An important thing to note here is that this is specifically going to be talking about workplace stress. The reason for that is that a lot of the things that you can be diagnosed with are only that way because in order to be able to treat it and for people to get help, we need to have a label for it to put into our systems or whatever, and like insurance companies. And so this specifically has been pushed for workplace. If you are a mother, if you are, a parent, if you are a caregiver of some kind, this can show up. If you are somebody with ADHD who's just trying to survive, the neural mechanisms are going to be the same. This diagnosis is specifically talking about work. Personally, I think that's ridiculous, and I think in future versions of this, we're going to see that that's the case, and people will agree with me. But for now, let's just talk about this as though, we're going to use the idea of a workplace is that anywhere that you're doing work, not just somewhere you're getting paid. Okay. So, burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It is characterized by 3 dimensions. So this is the important thing. Number 1, feelings of energy depletion and exhaustion. Number 2, increased mental distance from one's job or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job. I'm going to broaden that a little bit. Again, this is just my own take. You can just say increased mental distance from one's life or negativism or cynicism related to one's, like, this can be involved in anything that has been stressful in your life. Does that make sense? And number 3, a sense of ineffectiveness or lack of accomplishment. Burnout refers specifically to a phenomena in the occupational context and should not be applied to describe experiences in other areas of life. Interesting. This is a fairly new thing. Again, we're going to talk about burnout as it's used more broadly in I guess, society, because I think that it's important to know what is going on with burnout, right? And how we use the term burnout. Again, this is it's strange to me that they're as specific as they are. Maybe there are specific reasons. If you have ideas specifically in the comments below, give me reasons. I get the sense that this is mostly because they wanted to classify it as other things like an adjustment disorder or something like that. But anyways, those are the main symptoms. Basically, you're done with this shit, right? To put it bluntly. So let's now talk about why chronic stress actually does this to us. And to do this, we need to understand, don't get too overwhelmed by all these arrows here. This is essentially how our brain responds to stress. Okay, so step one, we have here this chronic stress that happens, or not just chronic stress, any kind of stress. And what our brain naturally does as a response to stress is that it starts here in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus sends a signal in the form of a neurotransmitter called CRF, which I believe is corticotropin releasing hormone or releasing factor. It's been a while since I looked at that. CRF sends a signal to your pituitary gland. Your pituitary gland then releases another hormone that goes from your pituitary gland down to the adrenal gland. This is ACTH, adrenocorticotropic. Anyway, ACTH. Probably should have looked these up. My bad. Anyway, the reality is that your brain sends a signal to your adrenal glands, which sit on top of your kidneys, and then your kidneys release glucocorticoid hormones. Now, what these actually are two things, either adrenaline, or also called epinephrine, or the other one would be cortisol, right? And so adrenaline is the fast-acting version of this hormone. It's very quick-acting. It's metabolized fairly quickly. Cortisol is a slower-acting one. And then, once this has been released into your body, there are things all over your body that will then respond to that hormone in your body, right? Your heart rate will increase. You will be more vigilant, those kinds of things. It basically turns on your fight or flight response. This is how that signal gets sent into your body. And you go into emergency mode, basically. From there, these red arrows are going to all these different areas, and you see these negative signs. At that point, once these hormones get back to your brain sort of goes, "Oh, cool, I hear you. We've got the signal out. We can turn off the cortisol production. We can turn off the adrenaline production. Everything's fine," right? And then this feedback loop happens. We're like, "Cool, boom, done. We can turn it off." In situations where life has moments of stress, this process works exactly as intended for most people, if not all, right? Like nearly all people. If for example, there's like an animal living in the woods and there's something that's dangerous, cool, boom, get it done, survive the event, and then your body turns it off and you can relax again. However, in chronic stress, what happens, again, in all these different areas, right? The pituitary gland, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus. The hippocampus is also responsible for memory, by the way. These receptors become less sensitive. So in other words, the off switch, over time, cortisol is essentially, in chronic cases, or in other words, in repeated long-term stress, that cortisol actually starts to damage some of these receptors and starts to make them less sensitive. And so what actually happens is that instead of this cortisol reaching the brain and your brain saying, "Oh, cool, like crisis averted, we're good," the off switch doesn't work as well, right? It becomes more difficult for your brain to turn off the stress. And so that's a big problem, right? Because then your body is in a constant state of emergency for longer. And not only that, but it is harder for your body to automatically turn off that stress response. And therefore, it's harder for your body to relax and to return back to a relaxed state. This can have all sorts of issues, but it can cause anything from memory problems to issues with your mood to issues with inflammation. And when people come to me talking about, well, how do I recover from burnout? Part of what burnout is you need to actually start by reducing stress. This is why things like, and this is why I think that a lot of people go on stress leave. And I mean, the number of people that I see coming into my office who either have been on stress leave or are on stress leave. If you are an employer where you have lots of people going off on stress leave, this is what's going on right here, is that your employees' brains you're literally causing brain damage. Okay. It's not irreversible brain damage, but it is actually traumatic. It is actually something that we need to get in front of this stress. Now, there's a few things that we can do here. Okay. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this video talking about, well, what do we do about it? But it is something that actually is very important, right? So rule number one with this is that you need to know that if you can get in front of things that are causing stress in your life, start to weed some of those things out, or at least reduce your exposure to them as much as possible. Because at the very least, the second thing is that you also need to be able to make time for yourself to relax. And that might be something that's hard for you. In future videos, what I'm going to do is we're going to actually do some breath work. I'm a huge believer in breath work, and a huge believer in finding time for mindfulness and meditation and relaxation. And there are things that you can do to help kickstart your body back into a relaxation response, right? We're very familiar with the idea of your fight or flight. That is the HPA axis that I just showed you. That's sort of like the backbone of how that signal gets sent out to everything in your body. But there's also sort of the flip side of it, which is the rest and digest, right? Or in other words, the sympathetic nervous system is the stress response, which is fight or flight. The parasympathetic nervous system is rest and digest. And breath work is a really effective way at intentionally kickstarting your relaxation response. That's something we're going to deal with in future videos, but I think that this is a good first way to understand why we get burned out, right? If you are constantly in a workplace where every day there is you're at a very high level of stress, and your body is constantly in this fight or flight, you've got lots of cortisol running through your veins. There are things that you can even get online that will measure your cortisol. I can't necessarily vouch for the accuracy of those things, but there are biological reasons for this. And so it's very important too to know that you are not there's nothing wrong with you if you are feeling burned out. We have this message or this expectation that I think either intentionally or unintentionally gets sent out that hey, you should be able to handle this. Everybody else seems to be able to handle it. Why aren't you handling it? Everybody's stress, where everybody is at is different, right? How much you can take, what is stressful to you, what's not. Those are things that there are lots of reasons why we find things stressful. And wherever you are at, we need to start thinking about burnout. I often will talk about it in the same way that of any kind of repetitive strain injury, right? If you've got carpal tunnel or tennis elbow or any kind of injury that I've been doing the same thing over and over again with our joints, it causes the inflammation and pain, and it causes damage to those joints. The same thing is true with our brain, with stress. Chronic stress causes changes in our brain. In fact, it also causes changes and we see changes in inflammation, changes in again, in levels of even how our epigenetics are, which is sort of how our cells express our genes. So that's a lot. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you find this helpful. And in future videos, again, we're going to talk about, well, what do I do about it? How do I learn to relax? How do I learn to feel safe if that's what we need? And there's definitely a few things that we can do in order to start to train our body to be able to feel relaxed. So I hope you like the video. Give it a like, thumbs up, share, and thanks so much for listening and watching. And I'll talk to you next time.